Now, I just wanted to make a very quick video here, because today Lucasfilm released what essentially amounts to an opening crawl for their upcoming High Republic era series of books and comics. And when I first read it, there was one thought that immediately popped into my head, which is that, more or less here, this really should have been the opening crawl for Episode 7. This should have been the premise for the sequel trilogy, not a story set 200 years before the prequels. Because as you can see, and you can feel free to pause the video and read the whole thing if you'd like, it talks about how the galaxy is ruled by the glorious Republic and protected by wise Jedi Knights. Two things I think most of us assumed would be in place 30 years after the original trilogy, or that we'd see at the start of the sequel trilogy. I think many of us assumed things would be relatively good, that everything the Rebellion had fought so hard for in that original trilogy would have paid off. Also in this crawl, we see that things are going so well for the Republic that they're trying to spread into the Outer Rim, which would actually make a lot of sense for sequels, considering back in the prequels, we learned that one of the problems of the Republic at the time was that they were allowing the Outer Rim to be this harsh, lawless place, where crime lords like Jabba ruled with impunity, and where slavery was still common practice, despite those anti-slavery laws that Padme mentioned and thought somehow were working. We also learn here that the Republic is launching what seems to be some type of space station called the Starlight Beacon, which to me sounds almost kind of like an opposite to the Death Star, that unlike how the Death Star I mean, was meant to spread fear and help control people, this Starlight Beacon would be a symbol of hope and was meant to liberate people. Furthermore, it also talks about a frightening new enemy, one that threatens the Republic, the Jedi, and even the Force itself, which, I gotta say, sounds more fitting and intriguing than fighting the reformed remnants of the Empire 30 years after they were defeated, which is what we learn is going on in the opening crawl of The Force Awakens, or at least that something called the Resistance is fighting them with the secret aid of the New Republic for reasons that will never be explained in the trilogy. And don't get me wrong here, I think there's a good story to be told, and was told, about the New Republic struggling to defeat the Empire once and for all. The original Thrawn trilogy, which takes place right after the events of the original trilogy, did a great job of this, but to basically fight the Empire version 2.0 30 years after they were defeated on Endor just makes the New Republic feel like a failure overall, that the Rebellion didn't accomplish much, especially when they get blown up halfway through the first movie. And no, I'm not saying there can't be any stray remnants of the Empire left even 30 years later, but the fact that they were allowed to coalesce into, theoretically, a superior version of the original Empire, one that the New Republic will not counter directly and instead indirectly counters with that aforementioned resistance, and that the First Order also turned a planet into a giant weapon right under the nose of the New Republic, well, it's all just kind of sad that that's what the Rebellion's efforts amounted to. And with the sequels we got, it also feels like we missed quite a bit, like there's a whole important part of the story that we just sort of skipped over. In fact, though still not a great story, I think the sequel trilogy would have made more sense if it was episodes 10 through 12, and where 7 through 9 would have been the story of the rise and fall of Luke's Jedi Order, if it would have showed us the struggles of the New Republic, and how the First Order was actually able to rise from the ashes of the Empire. Such a story might even focus on an antagonist hellbent on bringing Palpatine back from the dead, which could be Snoke, I guess, and where maybe Rey's father, who could be the literal son of Palpatine, not the son of a failed clone, was someone trying to stop him the whole time, but ultimately failed and had to hide his daughter because this antagonist had succeeded in bringing Palpatine back from the dead. Anyway here, if this High Republic crawl had instead been the opening crawl of the sequel trilogy or Episode 7, we wouldn't feel like we had missed anything, nothing that we didn't fully expect to happen anyway. Because again, after the original trilogy, I think we pretty much all assumed that the New Republic and a new Jedi Order, under Luke Skywalker, would ultimately thrive, and that the Empire would be defeated, and that it would take some sort of new external threat to put it all in jeopardy, and to challenge the Republic and the Jedi. Because, as I've said so many times before, the prequels were all about the fall of the Jedi and the Republic, the original trilogy was about their return, and so the sequels should have been about a test that they both faced, one they ultimately would pass or defeat, thus showing us they'll both stand for another 1,000 generations. Instead, not only are the sequels basically a retelling of the original trilogy, but they start off with everything having already gone wrong off-screen before the story even begins, which again makes it feel like we're just missing something very important. And not only that, but with the High Republic era, they actually sat down and plotted and planned out the whole story in advance, which I do hope leads to a good, cohesive overall narrative. And speaking of that, and to be clear here, none of this is meant to be a knock against the High Republic era. Though sure, I do have a few doubts. I'm just saying the premise or this opening crawl would have worked so much better for the sequel trilogy. And with the High Republic era, I'm trying to stay as open-minded and as positive about it as I can. And I'm only going to make a final judgment once the content starts coming out and we can see what it's all about. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Would this opening crawl have been more fitting for the sequel trilogy? And what are your thoughts on the High Republic era? Are you excited, indifferent, or do you really not care at all? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.